Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me for the Construction Technology Quarterly. Um, so what we're going to go through today is a number of different things, but they all kind of come from a central point, and that is that there's a lot going on in the construction industry. There's a lot of people that are introducing new ideas, new companies, new products, and I wanted to be able to pull that all into one place and provide essentially a directory with some commentary and some other ideas that kind of help make sense of it. So today I'm going to go through the thinking, develop some ideas that hopefully help help add some clarity to this massive industry we're all so in love with. So um, we all know that construction is seeing waves of innovation, lots of new companies, lots of new products. This has been kind of accelerating over the last 10 years or so, driven primarily by the consumerization of technology, but also, that built on itself and more venture money found its way in. So now you've got where there used to be too few options, now you could argue there are too many. And I heard this term over and over again, app fatigue. So, I just finished writing a book. It comes out in January. We'll talk about that later. But as I was interviewing over 100 people, the term app fatigue came up over and over again. And that got me thinking, what can we do to kind of corral that and get our arms around it? So what you're going to see today is kind of the introduction of the Construction Technology Quarterly. The goal of it there is to help people see what's out there, help them find companies, but do it in a way that is more intuitive and more driven by need and less so by just a list that someone made. Um, Ideas that will help make sense of it all. And these will be, in this case, there's two concepts that I'm going to go through a little bit later in the hour. And then courses, either ones that I've written myself or ones that I think are really great. And it turns out I was lucky enough to do some work with procore.org that I'll share with you a little bit later. But in future, we'll do this every quarter. And as I see things that I think help teams to upskill and help people to, kind of bring their teams forward, then I'll make sure to include that. And that kind of drives the content. So first, we're going to talk about demand. And this structure I'd like to do every quarter. So let's look at the construction industry at a structural level, understand what's driving demand and what's going on. Next is the kind of the meat of it, and that's supply of construction technology. So thinking about it, demand and supply, it sort of makes some sense. This right now is primarily going to be software companies, but in out quarters, I want to talk about materials, I want to talk about machines and other elements of the kind of the technology picture that goes into construction. Today, I'll introduce two frameworks. One is half trend, half framework. And then I'll talk about a series of courses on data and construction that I'm really proud of. First, though, I took a quick poll of those of you that came in through Eventbrite. We've got the number one category was general contractor, which I'm really excited about. Software vendors, I expected, and that's great. Glad to have you here. Consultants, also great. Glad to have you here. Sub-trade contractors, also a good number. And to be honest, some of what the directory that's going to be a part of this is really driven by is I want contractors to be able to find things in terms that are driven by what they do, not by what the software company does. So I'm really excited to have a good number of contractors here today. Joined also by architects, VCs and funding sources, and legal. So overall, really exciting to have a group like this here today. So thank you for joining. So today we're going to talk about demand in two ways. We're going to talk about first digital transformation, and then I'm going to kind of break down some things about the industry itself. So we think about digital transformation as the changing of a complex web of users, producers, regulators, and markets. And now you've heard these terms before. This isn't new. The reason I want to put it in these terms is so you can start thinking about all of the pieces that have to adjust one way or the other for the entire industry and the workflows that are part of it to move forward into where we need it to go, a more efficient, safe, effective construction industry. I myself have been part of a couple of digital transformations. So I was at Sony, believe it or not, I was a marketing manager on the Walkman when the iPod came out. I'll tell you, nothing teaches you humility like something like that. But also I was at AOL when we were all waiting for broadband, a word we don't even use anymore, but everybody thought it was years later than it should have been. While I was at a big ad agency, I saw the advertising industry go entirely from analog, TV and print and radio to what we see now, which is search and a bunch of other programmatic options. And then finally, training for my own company and the Glimpse Group, where I've been working in the last year. Watching that industry also slowly try to change from where it was to where it believes it needs to be. And what's interesting about that is, just like construction, you have people that have been in the industry for a long time, have deep skills, have a very clear sense of how things should work, and as a result are often not as fast to change as they think they should be. So to kind of dig into that just a little bit more, I want to go through each of those, and well, anyway, pardon me. There we go. Electronics was simple. So one of the reasons I want to quickly go through this is I also hear from the industry people often talking about how they wish it was happening quicker, and they look at other industries as if they are paragons of digital transformation efficiency. And I'll tell you, there's a couple things. One is, very often the structure of that industry is simpler. I can tell you electronics was relatively simple. Very big companies and very dominant companies that drove it, but nevertheless, it was a simpler question. Broadband, not so much. It was a little bit less simple. The driver of change there was more about ecosystem readiness, and just a couple of things had to line up. But all in all, it wasn't that bad. Advertising was even less simple, though, because you had multiple markets going on at once. You had a lot of vested interest, a lot of economics that worked, via kind of narrow channels. Once it changed, though, it all changed at once. But I think a lot of you will recognize this, and this isn't even a full list, but it gives you an idea that construction is complex in ways that other industries often are not. And again, in a lot of ways, I'm speaking to the choir, but this sort of sets up the rest of the conversation. And what I would like to point out is that, interestingly, unlike anywhere else, consumerization of technology is driving a lot of, or has driven a lot of the beginnings of transformation in construction. Contractor competition is also, we find a driver. So with that as set up, there's a guy named Mark Andreessen. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's the guy, the founder of Netscape and Andreessen Horowitz, and he said something in 2011 that was really central to what we're saying, and that is that software is eating the world. And what he meant is that in industry after industry, software is driving the transformation from physical and manual processes to automatic and data-driven processes through software. But so if we bring that back to this idea of digital transformation, that's what we're seeing across all of it, right? Is that first the paper processes and more physical processes are turning into software-based workflows. So that, for me, sets the stage of what we're even talking about. Why do we even care about who's out there building what? And it's, where do they fit into this? So the lessons that come out of some of this is that ecosystems change by hundreds of small decisions. And that means little things like someone doing the Construction Technology Quarterly, or the Construction Progress Coalition talking about workflows, or the Digit Group, Paul Doherty speaking everywhere about the future and where it's going, and so on and so forth. As I'll get to even later, there's a bunch of people who are trying to make these hundreds of small decisions easier, faster, and more confident. Along with that, though, is a sense of clarity about what's out there that helps those decisions. Again, kind of driving a lot of the conversation today is, how do we overcome app fatigue? How do we make this but this big group of offerings into organized categories that people can do something with? And we'll get to that in a little bit. Giving decision makers information and tools, they can make sense of all this, making, again, the decisions faster, better, and more durable. To the degree you're confident in something and you kind of know that you've thought about other options, you're more likely to stick with a decision than second guess yourself. The final piece here, and this is sort of a hope for Q1, excuse me, is hearing from others in the industry will help decision makers feel like it'll work for them. So one of the things we know about digital transformation and diffusion of innovations generally is people adopt things when they think it's going to work for them. Nobody really disputes that technology was going to work for somebody. But the question is, does it work for them, for their contractor, for their group, for their business, for their whatever it might be? And I think there's a lot of room to begin to have that conversation more openly and in a non kind of commercial way, which again, we're hoping to provide a forum for. So that was the first sort of setup to kind of give us a sense of where we're going, what digital transformation is, and some ideas around how it can work. as I mentioned before, I've spent a lot of time in technology and thinking about how transformations work and how technology gets adopted has been sort of a guiding concern for me for a long time, and that drives some of this. So first, I want to start with what I mentioned really early. I mentioned that everybody knows it's a big industry, and I actually don't hear the 730,000 as much as I hear the 1.3 trillion. Of course, you hear the 10 trillion number all the time too, which is an interesting one. But we feel comfortable with 1.3 trillion because it comes out of the BLS, and they may not be perfect, but they're better than the alternative. The problem is those numbers are so big we don't know what to do with it, and they hide a ton of variance. So let's look a little bit and stop thinking of construction as a single entity. The interesting thing about how most people think about their company, their job versus an industry is it's like the industry is a foreign country. Even though they know they're part of it, they don't think that their company may or may not represent a piece of that broader picture. It's just, you look at it as one big thing. And I think that's unhelpful because it leads us to believe opportunities are bigger than they are, but also maybe look at less, in a less focused way than we might. So I want to sharpen our statistics by digging through them a little bit. So we know it's about 1.3 trillion. Now, obviously 2020 is an exception in every sense. So these are actually, I think, 2018 numbers. What's interesting here is to start to say, that's great, but total construction, about 3/4 of it is private and about 1/4 of it's public. So now you say, let's look at private construction and then split that out between residential and non-residential. Again, these are just BLS numbers, but I think they start to give us a lot of people on the call will have had an intuition that the numbers are roughly here, but now you know they're here. And I forgot to mention, all this will be on a slide share for people to just grab and use anytime you want. So looking at private construction, we now have a little bit of a sense of residential versus non-residential. That's interesting. The next piece is public, which is about 1/4 of the pie. So here again, predominantly state and local, which is not surprising, given what we know about budgeting and all that, and about 30 billion is federal. So that's great. So we've got these buckets and we sort of know where the money's going, but what does that even tell us, right? Is all construction the same? Are each of these numbers the same, other than the fact that they differ in size? And obviously they're not. Putting up a house is not going to be the same as a 40-story building, is not going to be the same as a road, is not going to be the same as a bridge. But how do they change? So I found this a little while ago when I was looking into the infamous McKinsey study about productivity, and you hear it, people refer to it all the time about how awful things are. And my concern at the time is reflected in this, is that that's an awfully big brush to be painting. So what if we look at the industry like I just did? These don't line up perfectly to the buckets that I did, but you can start to see that actually commercial industrial building is not too bad. It's done relatively well from basically the crisis, the 2007, 2008 crisis through to 2018, whereas family residential construction a little less so, and highway, street and bridge construction about even to not so much. So what's interesting about that is you think about what we often are talking about when we're talking about construction technology. And this bears out in the 450 and roughly 450 companies and roughly 950 products that we have in the directory right now. Not that many of them are focused on single family residential construction. Of course there are some, but most of the time you're talking about bigger jobs, bigger crews, and sort of a bigger rollout. As a result, most of what we're talking about isn't 1.3 trillion, it's 440 billion. That's still very big, and I don't mean to imply that it's not, but it's worth thinking about. Most of the time we're talking about a subset of that huge market. That's already kind of interesting. All markets have leaders, so somebody has to sort of work this stuff out and have the budget and the need to go figure out technology so that it can be easier for later adopters to use. That's great. But it's only 1/3 of the total market. That's worth keeping in mind. And I guess the point is the DPRs and Mortensons of the world, they don't necessarily need help with digital transformation. When you talk to these people, they're as good as anyone anywhere. I just had a conversation with one of the VDC guys from Mortenson, a guy named Mark Kinsman, and they are advanced. So the point is, as we think about where the opportunity is and we think about where people are trying to sell in and how it's working, I think it's important to keep the a clear idea of what the landscape really looks like. And are we even addressing the other two-thirds? Are we, we talk about digital transformation, but how does that work when we're only looking at a third of the market? How does that go later? Sort of a couple times I'm going to put in a loose indicator, and I say that because this is not hard data. I looked at the ENR top 50 and just looked at approximate head count, how many people had keyword innovation and keyword technology. These top 5, I have enough connections that I sort of trust the numbers, but below that it started to get a little squirrely, so I didn't show any more. But it shows that the top companies, they're really staffed for technology. Now again, this is not, I didn't go talk to their HR. I just used the keyword technology in LinkedIn and saw how many people have that. But that's not bad. Bechtel has 2,500 people that have technology in their title. That's interesting. Innovation a little bit less so, but that honestly, almost anywhere that's gonna be a little bit the case. So I want to show you another look at that industry. So we looked at it by spending and not by companies. This is from the other direction, and this is construction companies by employee count. This is a dramatic, in my mind, dramatic chart. So you're showing, just so to make it, help it you make sense. At the left, you've got companies that have less than 5 people, 470,000 of them, right? Same thing, 5 to 9, you got 112. So of the roughly 730,000, almost all of them are under 250 people. There's about 155 firms that have over 1,000 people, which sounds like a lot until you think about how the industry works and how concentrated it's not. There are very few industries that are that look like this. In fact, I can't think of any, but there may be some. But it speaks to the fact that we treat as a whole something that not only is very different amongst itself, but is hugely skewed in different directions. These 3 company types don't behave the same way. Everybody knows that. Putting numbers around it, I thought was very helpful to start to get a sense that if I want to talk to a really professional, I mean, everybody's a professional, I don't mean it that way. They have staff who can actually address, assess, and deploy difficult technologies. The number of them is going to be, 300 or so. It's not 1,000, and it's certainly not 400,000. So as we think about this market and start to really understand what we mean by digital transformation, I think understanding what we're expecting to transform is really important and really helpful. So I'm seeing a couple of questions, which I'm going to just have a quick look. So I'm happy to talk to Darren. I'm happy to talk methodology. A lot of this comes from the BLS. So I would have to dig in and talk to you later. So Darren, you and I are connected. I'll follow up. Looking at the ENR top 50 again, you also see there's some level of skew. Honestly, these are all billion-dollar companies, so they're all big and can do whatever they need to do. But I thought that was an interesting way to have a look at our industry. Another one, though, that I couldn't help myself is we think about these companies as behemoths and we think about how they operate. I thought it'd be interesting to put it against some of the tech leaders that we talk about. And it just puts in perspective, that industry is honestly, these 4 companies are roughly the size of if you add all of their revenue together, it's in the low trillion. So it's sort of comparable. So it's interesting to look at how concentrated some other industries are. Now, we often talk about technology and how it's actually destructive to the workforce because of how concentrated it is. So this is an illustration of that, but it also speaks to how difficult it is for any company in this industry to have any level of market power. I've heard other people say that. It's not a new idea, but it's interesting to see what that means and how dramatic, how stark it is. So looking at that from yet another lens, the ENR 400, if you add up the revenue that ENR reports, it's about 374 billion. Interesting, that's about 29% of construction is just those 400. The top 50 is 17%. So again, as we think about where the structure of the industry and how it works, it's very interesting to me to see how that fragmentation winds up looking. And again, thinking about how you're going to view this market, discuss this market, and make strategies and plans against this market. It's easy to say that there must be a huge market or huge opportunity for that 2/3. But you have to understand you're now talking about prosumers sometimes, effectively consumers sometimes. So it's a very different beast. And I think, again, we do ourselves a disservice by talking about construction as if it's one thing. So summarizing that, about a third of construction industry is commercial. Commercial productivity is less dire than construction overall. And again, those of you that have worked on commercial versus residential versus some other situations will probably agree that it often is run a little bit differently. And also, it's big enough that you can get into a rhythm, whereas smaller jobs, sometimes that's less true. Most demand for products is probably going to come from the less than 400 potential customers. The remaining 2/3 is harder to reach, harder to convince, potentially harder to transform. This probably includes infrastructure, when it's government often has design, bid, build, and some other constraints that make sometimes adoption of technology harder. That honestly is a webinar in its own, and we can get into it another time. So that kind of concludes the first third of this, and that's really diving into and trying to provide some new lenses for the structure of the industry and how we're trying to sell into it. I'm just going to take a second look at what's in the chat. Colin, where do you recommend looking for the best stats of outlet for? I'm going to stop for a second. Ask that. I think that there's a couple of people that are doing a very good job of that. ENR does a good job. I'm not sure Dodge is forward looking. FMI, I think it is. If they chose to publish something, they do some really good work. I'm sorry, some of this is private. I just realized. Well, Colin, I answered your question. It was a good question about where to look for projections. Okay, so now kind of the meat of what got me going in the beginning was this idea of how do we get our arms around the supply of technology. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a little more focused on software for now. In out quarters, we'll round that out a little bit more, but right now most of the discussion often is around software. So the issue that I had is how do we organize literally hundreds of offerings? Very often what gets done is people say, here are all the ones that do project management. Fine, here are the ones that are AI, here are the ones that are drones, here are the ones that are, name your technology. And I don't love that. I think it's worth keeping track of, but I like the idea of getting better and better at allowing someone to search by what they're trying to get done. I mentioned at the beginning how excited I am that there's a number of contractors here, because that ultimately is what I'd love to see this become, is an easy place for someone to just search and find some options. And competition ultimately is based on customer problems, not on technical solutions. People don't necessarily buy AI unless it's marketing or they're trying to impress somebody. Usually they're trying to solve a problem, and AI may or may not be a way to do it, or VR or whatever else. So we organized around customer value, and essentially, again, the goal of this is to start with these different ways of categorizing, and I'll show you what that means in a second, with the goal later of adding the ability to tag by anybody, whether it's me or others that use this, so that it becomes increasingly useful in a crowdsourced sort of way. So we've started with major job type, and this was harder to do than I thought, to be honest, because what lives on one level versus another is a job for smarter people than me. But eventually we got there. Then we got into, within the major job type, what are the specific jobs? So major job type might be something like project accounting. Specific job might be something like billing. So within an accounting suite, you're going to have a number of things that a product can do. And that's why we get to numbers as big as 950. And honestly, I think that's pretty light, because you want to be capturing as much of what a product can do without being crazy. So for example, you think about an Autodesk Construction Cloud. It can do 40 things. How do we do that? Well, we give the same product a couple of entries, which is why there's only, 430 or 435 companies and 950 products. Layer 3 is we do look at the technology that's used. And finally, maturity of the technology that's used. And one of the frameworks that we'll talk at the end speaks to a nice way of looking at technology. So here, and again, this is an eye chart. I just want to sort of show you, this is the beginning of what we looked at from level 1, the sort of jobs to be done. And not surprisingly, if I had asked anyone on this call, what do you think there was the most of when it comes to software, everyone would have said probably project management. Shortly after that, we actually separated out job site management because it's different. It's a subset. There can be overlap, but again, if you're talking about something that's across time versus something that's, what's physically there, it can be very different. Design, not surprisingly, has a lot of people doing things. Then project accounting and so on and so forth. So this, and again, this sort of thing is a quick pull from the broader data set. Then I looked at specific functions, and not surprised, forgive me, this really is an eye chart. So if you can't read this, don't feel bad. I wanted to get it so that every little bullet is in there, which is why they're so small. But you start to see these are the things people are actually doing. So team communication or document management. We separated out document management from BIM and so on and so forth. Everything down to assessing quality and payroll and DFMA. So this is a pretty big list that I had a lot of fun adding to and continually tweaking. But again, you see that the things that there's a lot of involve communication, involve document management, involve kind of basically project management, which again is not surprising, but it speaks to, I think, a few things. When I look at this, the first thought is, wow, there's a lot of people out there that are producing these things. Most or all of these companies have sales and are viable companies. So there's also a lot of different people that are buying at different levels. So when I talked before about, let's be careful not to only look at the top third, I think the fact that there are so many of these, and when I look through some of the names I'd never seen before, there are people that are buying this sort of thing all over the kind of distribution. The next piece, I just took a quick grab of what the very top is, and it sort of speaks to what I mentioned earlier. A lot of this is collaboration, a lot of this is communication, so on and so forth. Now, this is an imperfect thing because a lot of real products use more than one technology, but typically most of what's offered is just web-based SaaS. A lot of things have a mobile app. We only counted it as a mobile app if that was a primary way it did business, which people usually tell you pretty loudly and clearly. Also interesting is how many marketplaces there were. We tried to be as broad as possible and not just be, talking to the people that are in TechCrunch. So as a result, there's a fair number of places where people are, looking for materials, or looking for machines, or they're looking for labor, and so on and so forth. So I kind of started to get at what did we find, and the report that I put out in a couple of weeks is going to be a little bit more in depth than this. But again, not surprisingly, project management and team communication are the biggest categories. Design with a close second. It's actually, you could argue, design has been digital for a long time because of ArchiCAD and so on and so forth. Almost everything is delivered via web-based SaaS. Again, most have a mobile app, but they're web-centric. Relatively few solutions are about putting work in place. And I want to get into what I mean by that in just a minute, or right here, actually. So a lot of you will have heard the term value chain. Basically, it's every process has an input and an output. And when you string these together into a chain, you produce value. That's called value chain. It's a way of looking at broader business processes. So one of the things that I do in addition to giving exciting webinars on Thursdays is I have a podcast, and I got to speak to Chris Mayer, who was the EVP of innovation at Suffolk, for one of the early podcasts, and he had a really interesting idea. He thought about dividing technologies into those that are necessary to get the work done and those that directly add value. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at what we see up here. Right, is that a lot of this is about organizing for work. A lot of this is about getting things in the right place. A lot of this is about communicating and so on. What's interesting is how few of them are about actually putting work in place. When somebody has a tool in their hand, making them work better. You see things like that, not surprisingly, from the tool makers like Milwaukee and Stanley and some others that are beginning to use software to make putting work in place more efficient and more and just better. But I found that really interesting, and I think that's an area for a lot of exploration that we're going to see more and more innovation in the coming years. So we're in a transformation. We're in a process, and famously it all started with the paperwork, forms, accounting, and communication. They're kind of gateways to deeper transformation of who does the work. Are we hiring different people, or are we staffed the way we need to be right now? That sort of thing takes a while. How we organize and what tools we use. So again, a very common thing you hear from consultants is people, process, and technology. And that's exactly right. And we're right in the middle of sort of that changing. And the key thing here is many of you will have heard this quote from a guy named William Gibson. He was an author, and he said, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I don't think there's any industry in the world where that's more true than for construction. And that's a lot of what we just saw. So some other findings that I kind of, because again, I saw every one of these things, is the tools to capture the job site, really understand and accessing what's being and what's already been built has just been a great year. Whether it's open space, whether it's a number of different folks using like a Hollow Builder, and I'm of course blanking on a whole list of companies doing really amazing stuff. COVID has of course accelerated that because we want to know without having to necessarily go to the job site. But also tools to collaborate and communicate. Again, not surprising. The reality is people text still all the time. And what I found that's interesting is some companies have actually started to use that. There's a great group out of Australia called Nifty.ai, and they've done some things with voice and text because it's the natural way people communicate, which I thought was pretty interesting. AI, it's a buzzword, and it can do some cool things. It's showing up more as services like voice and machine vision. And I got to be honest, having built some of this stuff, I like it better when people say we're using machine vision and voice, because you can often get good models and good services from someone who's already built them instead of having to find the data yourself. There are some less clear machine learning and AI powered offerings that I haven't myself worked with, but it's interesting. You're starting to see more and more of that. And then a bunch of interesting approaches to the reality capture I mentioned earlier. Some good things coming around IoT beyond just sensors. I mean, the reality is every phone is a sensor and every camera can be a sensor. So I think you're going to see IoT increasingly flexible and sophisticated about how it gathers data. So, within the broader idea of the Construction Technology Quarterly, what is up now actually is what I'm calling the CTQ directory. And in fact, I was able to get that URL, clever me, that it's actually ctq.directory. You'll see that in a minute. But it's the idea of a comprehensive construction technology database, obviously free, no pay to play, searchable by job, by task, and by technology, and then again, tagging for better search over time. Because you never know how people decide to call what people decide to call something, and it's a lesson I've learned building a lot of software across my career. I'm just going to stop real quick, have a look at chat. So the podcast is Constructed Future. So I'll talk about that all a little bit later because I can't help myself. So where does this go next? Actually, here we are. So I'm sharing this today. If you go to this bit.ly, I made it short so it's easy. It's a Google Sheet that you can go look at, and feel free to comment, especially if you see your company there and you think I missed something important. I made it so you can't do much more than comment. You can scroll, of course, because I want to make sure that that nobody clicks something and I have to go clean it up. But we're actually building a public-facing database right now. I'm just in the middle of debugging it. That'll be at ctq.directory. If you go there right now, though, you can there's a form where you can add your company, but also ask for another presentation like this, especially if it's a contractor or somebody who might use this. I'd love to talk to you about how this might be useful and what I might do. That's kind of classic product management, but trying to understand a little bit more about how we can continue to develop this. So that's sort of the 2/3 of what I wanted to talk about. So we've talked about demand, we've talked about supply. Now I'm going to talk about some frameworks. Honestly, each of these take a little bit, there's a lot under these, but I think they're really good for you to hear about, and for some of you it'll be personally valuable, and others I think it's just good to understand. So how do we map all these technologies? Obviously, you're not going to map 900 technologies, but a given company or a given group or a given team, you might have 5 of these or 4 of these. And if you think about everything you use, from your cell phone to text to all the rest of it, you actually have your own mini ecosystem. Everybody does. If you watch Netflix, text people and share photos, you've got your own little ecosystem. Companies obviously get them a little more complex. So there's a guy out of the UK named Simon Wardley, and he was a tech CEO, and he found that as his company was going through its own digital transformation, they weren't in construction, so this is a little while ago. He said, look, I want to look at what we have, what we use, and organize it against two things. One is how close is it to, in his case, How close is it to customers? Because he was a bit more customer facing. In my mind, that is who's driving value versus who's enabling value. The other side is how mature is the technology. Earlier, I mentioned that the fourth dimension, the fourth level that we went through with all these products is how mature are they? And we use Wardley's. I mean, you can say 1, 2, 3 if you want. It doesn't matter. The point is thinking in terms of 4 levels of how ready is this. So you think Genesis, that's something that a lot of AI can be like this, that it sort of works as long as the lights are dim and you stay quiet and you hold the microphone up real close. Custom built, it works. It just probably needs a little customization. Product means it works. Commodity means it's like AWS. It's like the power. It's a utility. It's an interesting way of thinking about the technologies that we use, especially as we think about adopting new things and we think about our own company ecosystem or our team or whatever. So how to organize current and potential technologies. And as I said, looking at that a little closer, and I've changed some of them, is closer to value creation. So closer to the field, closer to where work is being put in place. In contrast, is it a little more like enabling technologies, whether that's scheduling or counting or so on and so forth. And then very new versus very stable, different ways of looking at the same thing. I like this because, again, you can get caught up in the story of a product or the story of a couple of products and forget how it fits and forget that one of your key criteria for trying or adopting something new is always how does it fit into what we have now. This is a good way that is kind of tried and tested. It comes out of the software industry. I saw it at some, I forgot, I think it was an AWS conference. So it really is tried and tested for people that are adopting and thinking about how their little ecosystem works. In some cases, not so little ecosystems. So just to unpack some of that also, though, the value chain. So closer to value delivery, the technology, the less we can tolerate customization and experimentation. So it's fine to have your innovation group back in the office, handling things and working with a startup and so on and so forth. That obviously doesn't fly in the field, and we know that that's one of the barriers is that people just don't have the time for it. They're worried about safety. They're worried about all the hundreds of things moving around in a modern job site. So in construction, that means the closer to the work, the closer to the work of putting work in place, the core value delivery. One of the interesting things, we hear this word disruption all the time, and I think it's become one of those buzzwords that people don't necessarily, they just mean it's new. But actually what disruption, it's something quite specific. It comes from a guy out of Harvard a bunch of years ago. Wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And it's the idea that a very new approach replaces a very stable approach. And I hate to reach back into my own painful past, but when the iPod came out, it was dramatically better in one or two core ways, but in other ways it wasn't as good as the Walkman it was replacing. People that are diehard Apple fans might not agree, but the reality is at first it wasn't as good and then it iterated and got better. What winds up happening a lot is very stable approaches get disrupted by new approaches that maybe need a little customization, that maybe need a little more work or a little bit of adjustment, but ultimately they wind up growing and maturing into something that is dramatically better than what they replace. This is the ultimate promise of why we're even here. So anyway, Wardley's Genesis is where you go to disrupt processes with a new technology. It's just, you got to know that you're going to have to give it a little feeding. Maturity. So again, different maturity, different technologies support different levels of consulting and adjustment. So he liked to use these 4 categories, and I've spoken to that already. So again, one of my loose indicators, and I do this on purpose so that it's not hard data like some of the other things I shared. Most of what people are using and selling, and appropriately so, are in the commodity level or product. Again, most of this stuff is web-based SaaS, which is very well understood, and it doesn't mean everything that's web-based SaaS is going to work perfectly, but the underlying technology that makes it go is pretty well understood, and very seldom is any of the companies I've seen on the cutting edge of technology, certainly when it comes to the web side. There are absolutely companies like Vim AEC that are pushing the envelope in terms of compression and how to handle big geometries. But generally speaking, the technologies that are delivering value are pretty well understood, and most of them aren't at the Genesis stage. So before I go into framework 2, I'm just going to have a look at what that question was. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Richard. Clayton Christensen, that's right. He's actually incidentally the guy who came up, yeah, RIP indeed. He's the guy who came up with Jobs to be Done too. So I'm liberally stealing from his brilliance. Um, so the framework number two, and so far we've talked about things that people have some familiarity with, the Wardley ideas, presumably not so much. One of the things I'd like to be offering to the community is some of the things that are a little closer to the edge. This is very ironic that I was just talking about web-based SaaS, but service-oriented architectures are a way of thinking about bigger systems that I think, and I'd like for people to have heard of, because they're going to continue to become more important, especially as companies begin to snap things together and make them work as bigger systems of systems. So let me tell you what that means and ground it a little bit in some things I'm sure people know about. So software traditionally was one big thing, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. We're increasingly trying to break it up so that two things can happen. Different companies' software can talk to each other. That's what an API is. And for those of you who don't use that word a lot, it's application programming interface. It's kind of like the McDonald's window that allows one bit of software to ask for a hamburger from another bit of software. I really wish they were hamburgers, but APIs are really common. You hear it all the time. They're based on contracts between software to exchange data, and that's an important idea. They don't just, you can't just, bop two things together and hope they'll figure it out. One of them says, here's how you have to talk to me. The other one says, great, I'll figure out how to talk to you that way. So the question is, what if components within software started to do that, right? So what if a Procore, for example, broke up its, and they may do this, by the way, but broke up its authentication piece from its display piece, from its drawing piece, from whatever, and made it so these can talk to each other internally. The value of this, it's called service-oriented architecture. It's not that new. The new way of doing it is called microservices, and we'll get to that in a sec. But as a backup, it's worth keeping in mind what digital technologies even do, or especially softwares. They take in data, they do things to data, and they send data out. That happens all over modern software. So you can break apart all the places where doing things and sending data are organized differently and organized into lots of little pieces instead of one big monolith. So kind of telling you again what I just did, but now with blue boxes, which always makes things clearer. Traditionally, software is made as a monolith. It's just one big system. And most early stage startups have to do this because they don't have the team and they're still figuring out how to make things work. It turns out that monolithic software is really important for innovation because you want to control every piece. You're not at a place where you can write contracts between different parts of a software. Where we're at now, though, is often those monoliths become smaller and they outsource things from AWS or from LinkedIn or from Google or wherever it is with an API. And that comes through in software. So this is sort of the API approach that you're seeing all over the place, especially in web apps. Interestingly, though, there's a version of that you'll see with something called iPaaS, which a couple of consultants will do. But also, this is essentially what Procore's marketplace has done such a good job of. And before them was Salesforce. Salesforce's marketplace is amazing. Millions of downloads, hundreds, I don't even know how many apps are on there, but a lot. And essentially what these are doing is via an API, software's talking to the platform and it's talking to users. So first of all, it's important that everybody have a sense of this because what it winds up doing, especially the platform idea, is it means that a given software ecosystem can start to knit itself together. And you can have Struction Site that works with Procore that then goes to a user, and the user knows that Struction Site's there, but they don't have to log in 15 times and pass data back and forth and hope for the best. This is why you're seeing platform, and this iPaaS means infrastructure, I'm blanking on it, platform as a service, that's right. And it's a little bit the same. They often work the same, that's why I grouped them together. Big companies will have an iPaaS inside of their company called a service bus, but that's beyond today. So what I want you guys to be aware of, though, is this isn't really service oriented. This is just using APIs to connect different software together. What's already here, this is how Netflix is able to scale immediately. This is how all the big companies are able to scale no matter what happens, is that they break apart their software so that certain things can scale and that they don't have to scale everything. If you've heard of containers, this is what containers allow, software containers. What if you need to scale them up fast but then scale back down? What if you want to change how one function works but don't want to risk the whole system? That's another reason why microservices are smart. It allows you to swap out things and upgrade pieces of your software without having to rewrite everything, and test everything. So separate functions, you separate functions, excuse me, into microservices and then treat each of them like a little service. You put them into containers, little virtual machines that you can just copy. Now, again, I don't want to get too far ahead of the audience here, but the idea basically is you take little functions, you make them into their own thing, you pop them into a container, and once you're on an AWS, an Azure, or Google, you're able to just say, I want 50 more of these, and they can spin them up like that. So it makes a couple of things important. One is, again, it makes you basically able to scale without without failure, and not paying for that scale when you don't need it. But again, also it means you can hot swap things a lot easier. And you make them talk to each other. They talk to each other like little mini APIs. They don't call them that, it's something else. But microservices are I don't know how that just happened. Someone just drew. That's fun. So why does this, and this is what it looks like. You got all your little functions and it goes to a user. Why does this matter? So it takes a little more work. So you're going to find it in more mature products. But it makes them much more scalable, easier to support with different teams, and easier to integrate. So again, part of what I want to get done here with the quarterly is to talk about the industry, to talk about the technologies that are going towards it, and then to introduce some ideas that may not be immediately applicable, but that's the point. These are things that you'll hear about as different things come online and come your way. You can absolutely expect to hear about lasers and sharks next time. So as I say, most early products have to be built to be a monolith. So you shouldn't expect an early stage company to be anything other than a monolith, because they're trying to plug holes and make the thing go. But once you've figured it out, you're often going to find that you'll have some version of a microservice. And again, really stepping out over my skis here, what bigger companies are doing now is called a service mesh. And this is where I would see some of the ENR 50 thinking. Is not only are there microservices, but they're actually exposed now. So you have these functions that are actually living kind of on their own. It's really exciting because it means you're able to automatically respond. It manages itself. It isn't really AI. It's just algorithms saying, when this happens, do that. Dramatically optimizing cost and performance. If this is even kind of interesting, go check out istio.io. AWS has, make sure you Google it properly, because AWS is a deep, deep hole. And there's a company called MuleSoft that was bought by Salesforce. So that's enough about service meshes. Hold on one sec. So before I dig into our final piece, which is courses, Gareth, I'll respond since you asked privately. Okay. So don't have a ton to talk about, except that procore.org. I mean, I'm biased because they were nice enough to ask me to write a series of courses called the Data in Construction series. This happened right when COVID happened, so it took months to figure out how to film it. So I'm in there a little bit. Their production team was unbelievably good at dealing with it. So these are really good, worth keeping in mind. The point of these is to walk people through how data works, when it's important, how to think about it. We start with that. We go to some analytics. We talk about data on the job site. I talk a little bit about what AI actually is, but without getting too techie. And then we talk about where it's going. So really fun, great experience. I'd encourage you to check it out. And as I say, I was pretty honored to be doing what they're doing. And they launched it during Groundbreak, which was also fun timing. So if you're interested in having a look, go to just procore.org. If you Google Procore Data in Construction series, it'll show up. It's a free course, of course. And I was really excited to do it. And then beyond that, I talked earlier about constructed futures. I actually just put out a great podcast today. I was able to speak to a product management guru. She runs product management. Anyway, I'd seen her speak, and she's just a genius. So it was really cool. So just go to Constructed Futures if you're curious. And of course, I got to plug the book. I was really excited. Wiley was able to take on publishing this. It comes out on January 7th. Again, it's a bit of a primer. It's the idea of taking people through from soup all the way to dessert. What what technology is. So we talk about things like APIs, we talk about software, we get much more into AI than I, of course, did today, as well as VR and some other things. So it's really kind of an overview that starts from the beginning and gets somewhere pretty good. And then, as we kind of end here, I also want to, there's a way bigger list than this. I just, it got to be an eye chart. Amazing people out there. So for those of you who are excited about construction technology or just want to know how this stuff is working for you, what you see in front of you is a pretty broad range. Construction dorks are a group from the Midwest that are amazing, and they'll get really specific about how to execute things and how things have worked for them. I think a lot of them are mechanical contractors, so there's going to be a little bit of a focus there. The Construction Progress Coalition is that really cool hexagon, talking about kind of figuring out workflows and how that works, specific to the RFI, but they're talking about a lot more than that. The AEC hackathon, I was my friend Paul Doherty, who I think is on the call, and Damon Hernandez founded that in 2013 and had me there to serve sandwiches. So I've been excited about what they do ever since. I mentioned Procore.org. There's a lot going on with Procore.org. I would say, as part of who they're becoming, they're really looking to address culture as well as learning, as skilling, and so on and so forth. You guys have probably heard of the Society for Construction Solutions. There's a chapter in, I don't know, 10 or 15 cities in America. Certainly, I'm involved with, and in fact, some of my friends on the board are here on this call, which is great. The MCA Chicago is a real leader in how to upskill their people and really look after where the mechanical trades are going. Autodesk Redshift is amazing. It's often quite advanced in terms of thinking about design and so on and so forth. The test tube and the hammer is Blue Collar Labs. So there's a guy named Carl Sorensen who actually did a lot of the work that got me leading into this. He's amazing. They've got a couple of other things that they're doing, so keep an eye on them. And then, of course, the venerable Contech crew, who have the deepest kind of library of construction technology as anybody else. So I had to do that. I felt kind of compelled to shout out some of the people that are there. There's actually a ton more than this. Most of the unions, most of the associations are providing amazing things. I didn't mention the AGC here, and actually Ken Simonson, their economist, was pretty amazing. So as you know, I'm looking to create a niche a value here that is a directory where you can go find technology that's out there in as easy a way as possible. But I wanted you to know there's also a lot of great stuff out there. 99% of it is free. They're happy to talk about it, and you can join the conversation with questions or whatever you want. And in a lot of cases, you're talking about everything from contractors to software developers to engineers. And I want to thank some people that really supported this, because this has been a bit of a process. So the MCA Chicago, Dan Bulley, I hope is still on the call. They've been amazing. Blue Collar Labs I mentioned before, and then Paul Doherty at the Digital Group have just been insane. Guys, I got one more thank you. Hopefully she's still on, but somebody I'd worked with over the summer helped out amazingly. Her name is Gianna Barco. She's a college student at Fordham, so hopefully she's on and heard that. And that is it. So I'm right close to the hour. I'm going to leave this up here. So these are some of the URLs. If anybody wants them, screen grab it, whatever you want to do. The CTQ/public is, like I said, that's the sheet with 900 products on it. Go and comment. Tell me what I should be doing better, and I'll integrate it. The directory, if you go there now, takes you to where you can either add your company. There's a form there, or you can say, hey, I'd love you to get on the phone or get on a Zoom and talk to my team. Because again, the more I can do that, the better this will be. And then there's my email, which, anything else. So I'm going to dive in. Yes, so I'm sorry, guys. I'm just going to go through some of this. Gareth, if you don't mind, I'm going to answer your question. So what model would you say Autodesk is utilizing in the evolution of, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's because Autodesk is often integrating other things. It's entirely possible that their core service is microservices, but some of the pieces are not. And I don't. It isn't that they are or not a monolith by assembling a linked. It's not really what that's about. And I'm happy to dive into that more. Integrating other bits of software just means that you've got other blocks of code you have to speak to, but it can be an API. It can be, it doesn't have to be, it can be a lot of things, but it isn't really the idea of microservices. Um, uh, I have not looked at, so James Swanston asked a question about comparing the software landscape in construction versus manufacturing. I can talk to that right now. Um, Interestingly, the reason why logistics and manufacturing are, first of all, they're incredibly technically advanced. The 90s were all about enterprise resource planning, and it started kind of in supply chain, kind of in manufacturing. So they're pretty amazing, actually. And when you talk about like industrial IoT, German companies have been pushing that really hard. And primarily that's about supply chain into manufacturing. The reality is supply chain and manufacturing for a lot of things, there's a pretty blurred line when it's, what constitutes being production, what constitutes supply chain. Yes, what else we got? I think that's it. A lot of people say nice things, which is wonderful. Um, Fantastic. I don't know, Anil. I don't know if the book will be on Kindle. I hope so. To be honest, it's been a little bit of a fun ride. All right, so thank you all. We are at the hour. If you would like to unmute and just kind of talk, I think we're going to probably see people fall up pretty quickly because that seems that often is the case. People book an hour and then they go on to do the next thing. So I'm happy to hang around. I've kind of, I'm here for another half an hour or so if you'd like, or I can read chat. Well, thank you all for joining. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to hear your comments.